The man sat alone in the hospital corridor, his fingers trembling in his lap as he stared at the closed examination room door. Each passing second felt stretched thin with dread. If the results were bad, he didn't know what would happen to his daughter, who would care for her, who would stay when he couldn't. The thought pressed down on him until it was hard to breathe. A woman in an elegant coat lowered herself into the seat beside him so quietly he barely noticed her arrival. She looked flawless and composed, the kind of person whose presence naturally created distance. Everything about her suggested authority and control. Yet when she leaned closer, her voice betrayed her. "Please," she whispered, the word catching in her throat, "pretend you're my husband." He turned sharply, startled. She was a stranger, refined, confident, clearly someone important. Why would a woman like her ask something like that of a man she had never met? Daniel Brooks had been waiting in the oncology wing of the hospital for more than 2 hours. The plastic chair beneath him was unforgiving, and the sterile scent of disinfectant clung to the air. At 35, he worked as a mechanic in a small garage on the outskirts of Chicago, and he had never felt more alone in his life. 3 years earlier, his wife Emily had died in a sudden car accident, leaving him to raise their young daughter by himself. Now he sat here facing the possibility of lung cancer. If the biopsy confirmed it, Lily would be left with no one at all. After a moment, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, needing something, anything, to steady himself. His thumb moved automatically to the photo he always returned to. Lily, 6 years old, her pale blonde hair a tangled halo around her face, squeezed a worn stuffed bear to her chest and grinned at the camera with reckless joy. The sight of her smile ached somewhere deep inside him. She was everything. The reason he forced himself out of bed each morning, the reason he kept putting one foot in front of the other even when grief and exhaustion threatened to swallow him whole. There was no one else. His parents were gone, his brother lived several states away, and distance had hollowed their relationship into polite silence. There was no safety net waiting beneath them. If he fell, Lily would fall with him. His hands had begun to shake again without him noticing. The phone slipped from his grasp and struck the floor with a sharp clatter that echoed along the quiet corridor. He cursed under his breath and leaned forward, but before he could reach it, the woman beside him bent and picked it up. He hadn't realized she was watching him. Her gaze flicked briefly to the screen, catching Lily's bright, open smile before she turned the phone over and offered it back. Her expression remained composed, almost distant, but for the briefest instant something moved behind her eyes. A softness, a shadow of longing. "Thank you," Daniel muttered, taking it from her. Now that he looked at her properly, the details stood out. The clean lines of her tailored coat, the subtle gleam of expensive fabric, the stillness of her posture, controlled, deliberate, as if she were accustomed to being observed. She carried the quiet gravity of someone used to authority, to decisions that shifted lives and fortunes. And yet she sat here in the oncology corridor just like him, waiting for answers that could fracture everything. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, though Daniel did not know it yet. For more than a decade, she had stood at the helm of one of the Midwest's most powerful real estate firms, building an empire out of calculation, discipline, and an almost ruthless refusal to show weakness. In boardrooms she was known as untouchable, precise, composed, impossible to read. Investors trusted her, competitors feared her, and colleagues learned quickly that she never faltered in public. No one from that world knew where she was that morning. No one knew about the small, hard lump she had found 3 weeks earlier while dressing for work. No one knew how many nights she had lain awake since then, staring into darkness while dread quietly spread through her body like cold water. She had told no one. There was no one to tell. Her parents were gone. The engagement she had once believed in had ended years ago, sacrificed to ambition and distance. Friendships had thinned into professional alliances. What remained was her company, her creation, and a life structured entirely around control. So she had come to the hospital alone. Now she sat in the oncology wing among strangers, surrounded by antiseptic air and the muted sounds of machines, waiting to learn whether the body she had driven relentlessly for years was turning against her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah Mitchell had no strategy, no leverage, no certainty, only fear she could neither negotiate nor outrun. The chair beside Daniel scraped softly against the floor. He looked up. A woman lowered herself into the seat with the careful deliberation of someone conserving strength. She was perhaps in her late 50s, her hair a soft grey cut neatly at the jawline, her coat folded precisely across her lap despite the tremor in her hands. The effort of simply sitting had left her breathing shallowly. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The television murmured overhead. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor chimed in slow, indifferent intervals. Then she turned her head slightly toward him. "First time?" she asked. Her voice carried the roughened edges of long fatigue, but it was gentle, almost practiced in kindness. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." She gave the smallest of smiles, one that seemed to acknowledge far more than the word contained. "It shows," she said, "you still sit straight." He glanced down at himself, confused, and she let out a faint breath that might have been a laugh. "You'll learn," she went on. "After a while you stop sitting like you're waiting for permission to leave." Daniel wasn't sure how to answer. Something in her presence made ordinary politeness feel inadequate, almost childish. "Are you waiting for results?" he asked finally. She nodded. "Always," she said. The words settled between them with unexpected weight. Daniel felt it before he understood it, the way some sentences arrive already heavy with history. She turned her gaze forward again. "My name is Patricia," she said. "Daniel." They shook hands. Her grip was light but steady, her skin cool. Across the waiting area, Sarah Mitchell sat alone, eyes fixed on the blank television screen, unaware that the quiet gravity gathering around the young man and the older woman would soon reach her too. Sarah did not intend to notice them. She had mastered, over years of boardrooms and negotiations, the discipline of selective attention, the ability to erase surroundings and reduce the world to a single point of focus. It was how she endured long hearings, hostile meetings, and endless flights, by withdrawing inward until nothing external could reach her. She tried to do that now. But the waiting room was small, and silence carries differently in places where fear is shared. A woman's voice reached her first, low, worn but oddly warm, then a man's, younger, uncertain. The cadence of strangers speaking carefully to each other as if stepping across unfamiliar ground. Sarah's eyes lifted before she realized she had allowed them to. The young man sat angled toward the older woman, listening with the full attention of someone who had not yet learned how to pretend. His shoulders were tense, his hands clasped too tightly, but his gaze never drifted. The woman beside him spoke in brief intervals, pausing often, breath measured, yet her expression held a softness Sarah had not seen directed at anyone in years. They were, she understood at once, unconnected. No resemblance, no shared gestures, no ease born of history. And yet something unmistakable moved between them, an emerging thread of recognition, the fragile beginning of trust formed in a place where pretense dissolved quickly. Sarah felt a small, sharp shift inside herself. It was not envy exactly, nor longing. Those were emotions she had trained herself out of long ago. What she felt instead was closer to disorientation, the sudden awareness of standing outside a human exchange she no longer quite remembered how to enter. She looked away, but her attention did not release them. Patricia was the one who turned. It happened naturally, almost absent-mindedly, as though her awareness of the room had widened by instinct rather than intention. Her gaze moved past Daniel, across the narrow space, and came to rest on the woman sitting alone beneath the television. Sarah felt it immediately. Years of leadership had trained her to detect attention, the way others sense temperature changes. She kept her posture unchanged, eyes still directed forward, but a quiet tension gathered in her shoulders. She knew that look. People studied her often, assessing, calculating, approaching with agendas folded beneath courtesy. She had learned to wait them out, to let interest cool and pass. Engagement was risk, distance was control. But this gaze did not withdraw. After a few seconds, Sarah turned her head. Their eyes met. Up close, Patricia's face carried the unmistakable signatures of long illness. Skin thinned by treatment, shadows beneath the eyes, a delicacy in the way she held herself, as if strength had become a rationed resource. Yet what reached Sarah most was not frailty but presence, steady, unguarded, almost luminous in its directness. Patricia gave a small nod. "Long morning," she said gently. It was not a question, yet it opened space for answer. Sarah hesitated. She could have responded with the polished brevity that had served her all her adult life. A neutral phrase, a courteous deflection, a closing of doors disguised as civility. The habit rose automatically. But something in Patricia's expression made performance feel strangely inappropriate, almost absurd. "Yes," Sarah said. Her voice sounded unfamiliar to her own ears, quieter, stripped of its usual authority. Patricia's eyes softened, as if recognizing a language Sarah had not meant to speak aloud. "Would you like to sit with us?" she asked. The words were simple. The invitation was not. For a moment, Sarah did not move. The invitation hung in the air between them, quiet, unadorned, impossible to misinterpret. No pressure, no insistence, simply an offered place. Her first instinct was refusal. Not outwardly, she would never reject with bluntness. She would smile lightly, incline her head, perhaps say she was waiting for someone, a graceful boundary, intact and unchallenged. It was the language she had spoken for decades, the language of controlled distance. She felt the response forming already. But she did not speak. Instead, something unexpected surfaced beneath the reflex, a sudden, precise awareness of herself as she must appear from across the room. A solitary figure in tailored wool, seated apart, eyes fixed on nothing. Composed, yes, but also sealed, her isolation no longer chosen but visible. She realized, with a clarity that startled her, that she was tired of that image. Not the strength, not the independence. Those were foundations she still believed in. But the enclosure, the way every interaction had been filtered, measured, contained until little remained that could reach or be reached in return. Across from her, Patricia waited without urgency. Beside her, Daniel shifted slightly, uncertain but attentive, his gaze moving between them as though witnessing a fragile negotiation whose stakes he could not fully name. Sarah exhaled. The breath felt heavier than it should have. Then she stood. The distance between the chairs was barely 3 steps, yet it carried the weight of years, of practiced detachment, of self-sufficiency hardened into solitude, of a life arranged so carefully that unplanned closeness had almost vanished from it. She crossed it anyway. Patricia's face warmed into a quiet, welcoming smile as Sarah lowered herself into the empty chair beside them. "Sarah," she said after a small pause. Daniel nodded once in greeting. And just like that, the geometry of the waiting room changed. 3 strangers, seated together against the long uncertainty of the corridor, sharing the same thin boundary between fear and hope. For a few seconds after Sarah sat down, none of them spoke. The silence was different now, no longer the anonymous quiet of strangers sharing space, but something more aware, gently charged. Each of them seemed to sense that an unspoken threshold had just been crossed, though none could yet define it. It was Patricia who eased it open. "Daniel was just telling me this is his first time here," she said softly, turning slightly toward Sarah. "Hospitals have their own climate, it takes getting used to." There was no pity in her tone, only recognition. She spoke as someone mapping terrain already walked. Sarah inclined her head. "I imagine they do." Daniel gave a small, self-conscious breath. "I didn't expect the waiting to be the hardest part." Patricia nodded. "It often is." She rested her hands together over her folded coat, fingers laced loosely. "People think illness is about pain. Sometimes it is. But more often it's about uncertainty, stretching time until it feels almost physical." Sarah felt that sentence settle inside her with unsettling accuracy. She had lived 3 weeks in exactly that stretched time, each day balanced between dismissal and dread. "Yes," she said quietly, "that's very true." It was the most personal agreement she had offered a stranger in years. Daniel glanced at her, surprised perhaps by the softness in her voice. "Are you waiting for results too?" The question was simple, direct, no social padding. Sarah paused. She could have deflected. She almost did. But something about the fragile honesty already present between them made evasion feel disproportionate, like introducing falsehood into a space held deliberately clear. "Yes," she said, "tests." Patricia's gaze met hers, not probing, not alarmed, simply steady. "The first ones are the longest," Patricia said. "After that you learn the rhythm. Scan, wait, answer, repeat." She gave a faint, wry smile. "It becomes a calendar you never meant to keep." Daniel swallowed. "Does it get easier?" Patricia considered that, her expression thoughtful rather than bleak. "No," she said gently, "but it becomes less unfamiliar." The distinction mattered. Sarah felt it land with quiet force. Not relief, not reassurance, but orientation, the difference between terror of the unknown and endurance of the known. For the first time that morning, she realized she was no longer alone inside the fear. And neither, she sensed, were they. The corridor's quiet fractured the moment the elevator doors opened. A woman appeared first, her movements deliberate, confident, Patricia Henderson in full command of her presence. Behind her a man followed, his expression bland, bored, a silent shadow of her authority. They were headed for the VIP wing above, but then Patricia's sharp eyes landed on Sarah. Recognition flared, and her practiced smile shifted into something harder, predatory. She had been hunting for a weakness, a crack in the armor of the untouchable CEO, and here it was, on the same floor, waiting to be exploited. "Sarah, darling," Patricia said, her voice sweet, almost syrupy but lined with menace. "What on earth are you doing here, all alone?" Sarah's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. She knew the danger immediately. Any hint of vulnerability, any sign that she lacked support would be used against her in the boardroom. The merger with the New York firm was weeks away. A single whisper of weakness could unravel everything she had built. Patricia tilted her head, eyes scanning for a flaw. "Where's your husband?" she asked, each word deliberate, probing. Sarah's mind raced, searching for defenses. Every reflexive response she had trained over years rose to the surface, but behind them, panic bubbled, the same cold, raw terror that had accompanied her since discovering the lump. Patricia pressed on, voice soft but venomous. "Oh right, you're still single, aren't you? Poor thing. Must be so lonely going through something like this without someone at your side." Sarah felt the walls tighten around her chest. She had spent her career making sure no one ever saw her sweat, yet here was someone watching her like a hawk, circling a wounded target. Her eyes flicked to Daniel, the stranger with tired eyes and trembling hands, the man who had held his daughter's photo in his phone. He was nothing in this world of power and influence, yet in this moment he was her only shield. Before she could even think it through, Sarah acted. She slid across the 3 empty seats and sat beside him, letting her hand brush over his, lacing their fingers together with a practiced intimacy. She lifted her gaze, and her smile, calm, controlled, and icy, met Patricia's. "My husband is right here, Patricia," she said. The words cut through the air. Daniel froze, mind short-circuiting. A stranger, holding his hand, calling him her husband, right in front of a predator who lived for exploiting weaknesses. Patricia blinked, her sharp, assessing eyes taking him in, his worn jacket, his calloused hands. She had expected fragility, she found none. Sarah's grip tightened ever so slightly, a silent plea he somehow understood. He leaned closer, instinctive, protective, like he had done this 100 times before. Patricia's smirk faltered. She had found no leverage, no opening. Daniel spoke, voice calm, grounded. "I work with my hands. I keep to myself. I support my wife from behind the scenes. Not everyone needs to be front and center, Patricia." Patricia's eyes narrowed, searching for a crack that wasn't there. She finally gave a last, suspicious glance, then turned and left, dragging her husband behind her toward the elevator. The corridor fell silent again. Sarah exhaled, releasing her grip on Daniel's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. I don't know what came over me." Daniel looked at her, saw past the armor, past the tailored coat, past the CEO mask, and for the first time he saw her as a person. Exhausted, afraid, human. "You're waiting for results too," he said softly. Not a question, more an acknowledgement. Sarah nodded slowly. For the first time in months, maybe years, she did not feel completely alone. They walked together in silence toward the parking lot. The afternoon sun bounced off the windshields, sharp and bright, forcing Sarah to squint. Her mind raced faster than her steps. Every plan she had ever relied on felt fragile, worthless in the face of Patricia's scrutiny. And now, for the first time, she had no contingency. She stopped abruptly beside Daniel's old Ford, its rust creeping up the wheel wells, and turned to him. "For the next 3 days," she said, her voice steady but edged with urgency, "I need you to keep pretending, at least at the hospital. With Patricia watching, if anyone discovers I lied, it could ruin everything." Daniel stared at her, keys held limply in his hand. His brows furrowed, and a laugh that sounded more like disbelief escaped him. "I don't belong in your world, Miss Mitchell. I'm a mechanic, I fix cars. Whatever game you're playing, I'm not part of it." She exhaled sharply, frustration tightening her chest. Sarah Mitchell, who had spent decades reading people, assessing their desires, exploiting them, now found herself powerless to negotiate with this stranger. "I'll pay you," she said, a bitter taste in her mouth as the words left her lips. "Anything you need. If your results aren't good, I can help you make sure your daughter has someone, a stable home, people who will care for her. I have resources, Daniel's jaw went tight. The thought of Lily, his little girl, the only reason he got out of bed every morning, hit him like a physical blow. He understood instantly. This woman, this stranger, was offering him the one thing he could not give her daughter himself, a safety net. He stood there for a long moment, the keys digging into his palm. Every instinct told him to walk away. This was not his world. Corporate empires had nothing to do with him. And then he thought of Lily, of her wild laugh, her messy hair, the way she still kissed her mother's picture goodnight. If there was even a chance that this stranger could protect her, how could he refuse? 3 days, he said finally, his voice flat, resigned. That's it. Sarah exhaled, a fraction of the weight lifting from her chest. 3 days, she repeated. It was the beginning of an arrangement neither of them had imagined, yet one that would change everything. The next morning they met at the hospital. Daniel had chosen clean jeans and a buttoned-down shirt, freshly ironed for the first time in years. He felt out of place the moment he stepped through the automatic doors, surrounded by the polished floors and quiet efficiency of the oncology wing. Sarah was waiting, already seated reviewing paperwork she had brought for her insurance forms. The subtle tension between them hung in the air, filled with the unspoken instructions of their agreement. For a moment they simply sat, two strangers playing a part, each silently measuring the other's cues. When the paperwork was done, they lingered in the hospital cafeteria. The space was empty, the hum of the coffee machine and distant chatter providing a soft background to their awkward silence. Daniel stirred his coffee slowly, watching the surface ripple, while Sarah checked emails she did not need to read. Finally, she spoke. "Tell me about your daughter," she said quietly. Her tone was uncertain, as if testing the water. "I want to know." Daniel looked up, startled. He hesitated, measuring how much to share with this stranger who now claimed his presence as part of her defense. Then something in him softened. He spoke of Lily's obsession with drawing, the endless pages filled with animals, houses, and imaginary worlds. He described her star-shaped nightlight that kept her from fear, the way she asked if her mother was watching them from the stars, and how he had barely reached the bathroom before tears came unbidden that night. Sarah listened without interruption. Years of her life had been spent around people talking about numbers, deals, and strategy. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to hear someone speak about something real, something that truly mattered. By the time Daniel paused, Sarah realized she was experiencing something she had never allowed herself before: envy. Not for his life, not for his struggles, but for the pure, unwavering love he felt for his daughter. She had never known that kind of connection. In that quiet hospital cafeteria, between sips of coffee and murmurs of staff in the distance, two strangers were beginning to understand each other in a way neither had expected. The next morning felt heavier. Sarah and Daniel met at the hospital early, the air between them already charged with unspoken tension. The previous day's small victories had given them a fragile rhythm, but nothing had prepared them for what came next. Patricia appeared again, this time with her assistant trailing closely behind. She claimed it was a routine visit, but Sarah knew better. Patricia was hunting, scanning for any crack in the story, any sign that Sarah's narrative of support was false. The moment Patricia spotted them in the lobby, she approached with precise, predatory confidence. Daniel reacted instinctively. He took Sarah's hand, lacing his fingers with hers as they had practiced. Sarah leaned slightly toward him, their shoulders brushing, crafting the illusion of comfort and familiarity. To anyone else, they looked like a genuine couple, seamlessly blending into the hospital's mundane activity. Patricia circled them like a shark, her questions pointed, her gaze sharp. How had they met? Where did they live? Why had Daniel never attended company events? Daniel answered calmly, sticking to the vague, rehearsed story. He worked with his hands, valued his privacy, and preferred to support his wife quietly behind the scenes. For 20 minutes, Patricia probed. Each answer reinforced their ruse. Finally, frustrated and unable to find a gap, she retreated, pulling her assistant along with her. The hospital wing returned to its quiet rhythm, but Sarah and Daniel couldn't risk separation. They walked together a few blocks away to a small, nearly empty restaurant, assuming the roles of a real married couple having a casual lunch. They ate in silence at first, the awkwardness of pretending weighing heavily on them. Sarah ordered a salad she barely touched. Daniel mechanically picked at his sandwich, mind elsewhere, replaying the morning's confrontation. Then, breaking the quiet, Sarah asked a question that startled them both. "Aren't you afraid of dying?" she asked. Daniel paused, setting down his sandwich. His eyes were distant, raw with emotion. "Terrified," he admitted. "But more than death, I fear Lily becoming an orphan. If I die, she has no one. That thought keeps me awake at night." Sarah said nothing. Words would have been hollow. His honesty cracked open a door she had kept locked for decades. For the first time, she realized the depth of isolation she had built around herself. No one who would stay awake worrying if she didn't return home. She had an empire, yes, but she had built it alone. The truth hung between them, heavier than any paperwork or corporate maneuver. And yet, in that quiet restaurant, the bond forged in 3 days of shared fear and pretense deepened. The third day arrived faster than either of them expected. They met at the hospital early in the morning, moving with a quiet that felt heavier than before. The light-hearted jokes and cautious small talk of the previous days had vanished, replaced by a tense anticipation neither could break. Today was the day their patience, courage, and the fragile connection between them would be tested. Before stepping into the doctor's office, Sarah turned to Daniel. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said. "Whatever happens today, these 3 days, they were the first time I didn't feel completely alone." Daniel met her gaze, searching for words that might capture his own emotions. But none came. The weight of the moment, the hours of fear, and the delicate bond they had forged made speech feel inadequate. The nurse called his name. Daniel entered first. His chest tight with tension. He sat across from Dr. Matthews, a weary man in his 50s, and listened as the results were delivered. The tumor in his lung was benign, a growth that needed monitoring but was not cancer. Relief surged through him, so overwhelming that he nearly toppled from his chair. He pressed his hands to his face, trying to contain the tears and laughter intertwined. He was going to live. He would be there for Lily, her first day of middle school, her first heartbreak, her graduation. Every future he had feared losing stretched before him like an open road. When he walked out, Sarah was waiting, her expression carefully composed, but Daniel saw the shadow of what the news might be. She would not yet speak of it, but he could read the unease in her eyes. "Good news," he said simply, a smile breaking through, still shaking from relief. Sarah nodded, smoothing her coat and bracing herself. The door to the doctor's office closed behind her, and Daniel waited. Minutes later, she emerged pale, her face neutral, but her eyes betrayed the truth. "Malignant," she said softly. "Stage 1. They caught it early, but I'll need surgery and treatment after that." Daniel didn't hesitate. He crossed the short space between them and took her hand, the same way she had taken his 3 days ago. This time it wasn't an act. This time it was real. Sarah looked down at their joined hands and allowed herself to feel it, the warmth, the steadiness, the unexpected comfort of being held. For a lifetime she had refused to need anyone. Now she clung to a stranger as if he were the only thing keeping her afloat. Sarah's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. Without thinking, she answered. The voice on the other end was bright and oblivious to the weight of the moment. Her assistant, announcing the merger. "Ms. Mitchell, the deal is approved. The board was impressed by your family support system. Mrs. Henderson couldn't find any reason to object. Congratulations." Daniel heard every word, even though the phone was pressed to Sarah's ear. Family support system. The phrase echoed in his mind, loaded with a meaning he hadn't considered before. He slowly let go of Sarah's hand, stepping back. His expression hardened, cold and distant. "Congratulations," he said flatly. "Your deal went through." Sarah's eyes widened. She could see the walls he was building around himself, the sudden barrier of distance. "Daniel," she started, but he shook his head. "I understand perfectly," he said quietly. "From the start you needed a fake husband to protect your career. I did my job." He turned toward the elevator, shoulders squared, face unreadable. "Good luck with your surgery, Miss Mitchell," he added without looking back. Sarah called after him, but he didn't stop. He didn't glance back. The doors opened and he stepped inside, then he was gone. In the empty hospital corridor, Sarah stood alone, her fingers tingling where his hand had been. She had survived the confrontation, secured her deal, and yet the loss of his presence left a hollow ache. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had changed. Inside, she realized that in protecting her empire, she had also lost the one person who had truly seen her. That night, Daniel sat on the floor of Lily's bedroom, watching her sleep. She was curled beneath her blanket, her stuffed bear tucked under her chin, soft, even breaths rising and falling in rhythm. The nightlight cast a gentle glow across her small face, illuminating the innocence and safety he had fought so hard to preserve. Relief and gratitude washed over him. He was going to live. He was going to be there for Lily's milestones, for her laughter, her tears, her first day at middle school, her first heartbreak. All that mattered now, and yet. A hollow ache lingered in his chest, one unrelated to his own health. Thoughts of Sarah intruded, unbidden, her face when she received her diagnosis, the warmth of her hand in his. He reminded himself it was all a ruse, a temporary business arrangement. Yet somewhere in those 3 days something had shifted. He didn't know how to undo it. Lily stirred, opening her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, still half asleep. He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart." But Lily sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, where's the pretty lady? Is she coming to visit?" Daniel's stomach twisted. He froze. "Pretty lady?" "The one from the hospital. You were holding her hand in the picture on your phone," Lily said softly, eyes a little sad. "I want to make her a drawing so she feels better." Daniel looked at his daughter, stunned. He had not realized how much she had noticed, how deeply she had observed. "Maybe someday," he said gently, forcing a soft smile. "Now go back to sleep." Lily nodded and snuggled back under her blanket, drifting off again. Daniel remained on the floor, tracing the outline of her hair in the dim light, thinking of Sarah alone in her penthouse, facing surgery with no one beside her. He remembered the way she had listened to him speak of Lily, truly listened, as if what he said mattered. His thumb hovered over his phone, poised to dial, but he set it down. He let the night stretch around him, heavy and silent, and went to bed, thoughts full of someone he couldn't yet reach. Across the city, Sarah lay on the gurney in the cold, sterile hospital room. Machines hummed quietly, nurses moved with calm efficiency, adjusting IVs and checking monitors. She stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny holes in the pattern, anything to keep her mind from wandering to darker thoughts. The room was silent except for the faint mechanical beeps and the quiet efficiency of the staff. A nurse appeared with a clipboard. "Miss Mitchell, is there anyone we should contact? Any family we can call?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, there's no one." The nurse's eyes flickered with something close to pity, but she maintained professionalism. Notes were made and she moved on, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. For the first time in years, the tears came. Silent at first, they slid down her temples, disappearing into her hair. Then her shoulders shook, and she pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle the sound. These weren't tears of fear for dying. They were tears of realization. She had spent her life pushing people away, building an empire alone. She had fought off hostile takeovers, stared down board members, survived personal loss, but never allowed herself to be seen, truly seen, by anyone. Before being wheeled into surgery, she requested a pen and paper. Hands trembling, she forced herself to write a letter, short but weighted with every emotion she had bottled for decades. "Daniel," she wrote, "I chose you that day because I needed a fake husband. But in those 3 days I realized I didn't need a husband. I needed someone who truly saw me. You were the first person to do that. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to tell you when I still could. If I don't make it through, please tell Lily that the pretty lady thinks she's the luckiest girl in the world to have a dad like you." She folded the letter carefully and handed it to her assistant with instructions to deliver it to Daniel's address. Then, the gurney moved, the world went dark, and she surrendered herself to the hands of the surgeons. The next morning, Daniel was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for Lily, when a knock echoed through the apartment. A young woman in a business suit stood at the door, holding an envelope. She didn't speak, didn't linger, she simply handed it to him and walked away. Daniel stared down at his name, written in elegant, flowing handwriting. He tore the envelope open and read the letter once, twice, then a third time. His hands trembled and the words sank into his chest like stones. Lily looked up from her cereal. "Daddy, your eyes are red." He didn't answer, not yet. His mind raced, already dialing the garage to let them know he wouldn't be coming in. Then he called Mrs. Rodriguez next door, asking if she could watch Lily for a few hours, withholding any explanation. There was no time for hesitation. 20 minutes later, Daniel was in his truck, speeding toward Northwestern Memorial Hospital. His heart pounded with uncertainty. He didn't know if he was too late, didn't know what he would say when he arrived. All he knew was he couldn't let her face this alone. Not anymore. He arrived just as Sarah was being wheeled out of the recovery room. She was still unconscious, her face pale against the white pillow, her dark hair spread around her head like a halo. Without hesitation, Daniel pulled a chair close to her bed and took her hand in his, the same way she had taken his the first day in the oncology wing. He sat there, unwavering, holding her hand and watching her breathe. An hour passed. Nurses came and went, adjusting medications, checking vitals. Daniel didn't move. He simply remained there, a silent anchor beside her. When Sarah's eyes finally fluttered open, the first thing she saw was him. "Daniel, am I dreaming?" she whispered, voice cracked and dry. "No," he said softly, "I'm here." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not here to pretend to be your husband anymore," he said. "I'm here to stay, for real this time." 3 months later, Sarah completed her first round of treatment. The surgery had been successful and doctors were optimistic about her recovery. Her hair had begun to thin from chemotherapy, and she had lost weight, but her eyes held a newfound lightness, a sense of release she hadn't felt in years. She was learning to accept help, to lean on someone else, and to trust that she didn't have to carry the weight of her life alone. Daniel, meanwhile, returned to his garage in suburban Chicago. On the surface, life appeared unchanged. He still worked under hoods, repaired cars, and carried the familiar rhythm of his days. Yet everything had shifted quietly beneath the surface. When he came home, someone other than Lily now waited for him, someone who asked about his day and genuinely wanted to hear the answer. Sarah was there, not as a guest, not as a temporary presence, but as a companion. On a warm spring afternoon, the three of them sat together on a bench in Millennium Park, not far from the hospital where Sarah continued her follow-ups. Lily, perched between them, battled a melting ice cream cone, her laughter filling the space around them. The city hummed, but within their small bubble there was calm. "Miss Sarah," Lily said, chocolate smeared around her mouth, "Daddy talks about you all the time, it's so annoying." Daniel's face flushed red, but Sarah laughed freely, unguarded, the sound bright and real. A laughter she hadn't allowed herself in years. Lily grinned, oblivious to her father's embarrassment. "But I like it because when he talks about you he smiles. He hasn't smiled like that for a long time." Sarah looked at Daniel, eyes shining. Daniel met her gaze, and in that silent exchange no words were needed. "Thank you for not walking away," Sarah said softly. Daniel reached over and rested his hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for holding my hand that day," he replied. Lily, ice cream dripping down her chin, piped up, "Are you guys going to kiss or what?" Both adults laughed together, the tension of the past weeks dissolving. Sarah leaned into Daniel and he wrapped an arm around her. Lily returned to her ice cream, perfectly content with the little world they had created together. Sometimes life tests us in our weakest moments, but it is in those moments that we find the people who make us stronger. Not because they are perfect, but because they are real.